Hi, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, joined by Sheldon Richmond, the foundation's vice president, and this is the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you libertarian perspectives on the burning issues of the day that you're not going to find in the mainstream media. Sheldon, one of the remarkable developments in the war on drugs that we've been saddled with for, so many decades is that there are now many Latin Americans that are calling for an end to this war on drugs. Now they're not exactly on the same page with respect to what the solution is, which of course is legalization of drugs. They've got different proposals, but there is this consensus building after decades of this drug war nonsense that something has to shift here. And they're all talking in terms of ending the war on drugs, even if they don't realize that the only solution is to just go ahead and legalize it. I think this is absolutely a remarkable development in the war on drugs when you've got the mainstream that is now calling for end of the war on drugs. It was libertarians. We've called for the end of this drug war for decades. Milton Friedman had that famous essay in the Wall Street Journal. There's been other people, some conservatives, Bill Buckley, major liberals, but now we have mainstream politicians, public officials, journalists, and so forth. I think this is a fantastic development. What do you think?
Yes, it's one of the most encouraging things, almost on any issue that I can think of. That, along with the fact that a couple of states now have the people of two states have voted to legalize any recreational use of marijuana. This is great news. I mean, it would be nice if they were coming around on libertarian grounds that people should be free in this area. But just like with prohibition, prohibition of alcohol didn't end in the 30s because they suddenly became libertarians, but they suddenly realized they were foregoing a lot of revenue. The Depression was on, and someone said, "Hey, we could make a lot of money if we legalize alcohol." So I guess what matters is that the drug war end, and not the particular reason that it ends. And so this is very encouraging. Of course, the American response has not been encouraging at all. It's been that typical patronizing attitude toward the Latin Americans, like, well, look, no way the drug war is ending. So shut up about that. But this is great, and we need to encourage them.
Yeah, I think your point about the libertarian case, the moral case, is so powerful. Even if most people accept that it's an evil and destructive war based on utilitarian grounds, I think it's those of us that make the moral principles involved here. We elevate those moral principles. I think that's what ultimately shifts a society. Obviously, we're a tiny minority of people that focus in on that, but I think that minority has always been the thing that shifts societies. And what is that moral case? It's the fact that freedom demands that a person be free to engage in any peaceful activity without being punished by the state for it. And I think you couldn't find a better example of this denigration of this freedom principle than the drug war. Because look what they're doing. They're punishing a person for doing nothing worse than just ingesting a substance that the state says is harmful. I mean, their mindset is, we are the masters, you're the servant. You will ingest what we tell you to ingest, and you won't ingest what we order you not to ingest. We control you. I just can't imagine finding a better example of the denigration of human liberty than that. If a person's not free to ingest whatever he wants to ingest, how in the world can he truly be considered free?
Well, most people, of course, aren't with us. They don't understand the whole issue of drugs and addiction, and they have to be corrected on that before they'll ever understand the libertarian position. And they have this idea that addiction is something like, you're walking down a street and there's this some kind of phantom in an alley called addiction that then leaps out of it and then jumps into your body and then inhabits you, and then you're a slave for the rest of your life. As long as people think of drugs that way, they're not going to be inclined to have drugs be perfectly legal and acknowledge freedom in this area. So we need to really correct that part of it. And they won't even be impressed that the drug war is even worse than drugs are. Because I'm not sure they'll tend to believe that. Now, some people do come around. It's true. There are a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, I guess, but there are former law enforcement people who are now even activists for ending the drug war because they've seen how bad the drug war is. But the average person, I don't think, realizes that. Don't forget, the worst of it is in minority neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, inner cities. That's where the worst stuff occurs. I mean, if you watch TV series like Wired, I mean, you get a pretty good picture of what life is like in the drug war. But most people never see that. Certainly, middle class people are somewhat insulated from that. So it doesn't seem like it's libertarian grounds that are going to bring this about. It's going to get going when, just like these Latin American leaders are now going through. It's going to get started when they realize this drug war is a total disaster. It's creating, massive violence, powerful militias and drug kingpins, and they're going to be driven to desperation to some form of legalization. Now, we should be in there, given the libertarian case too, but I'm not optimistic that's going to end up leading the way. I think it's this more pragmatic thing. The problem is you have many entrenched interests that benefit from the drug war. You have the politicians, which make a lot of hay out of it. You have the rehab industry, which makes tons of money because judges can force people to go into these rehab facilities, and if they don't, they go to prison. So it's like it's a form of guaranteed customers coming from the courts. The police generally are happy about it because they get big budgets, and the police are very militarized. So you have plenty of people making big bucks off it. You have a drug government complex, which includes the military, and then of course the black marketeers like it. So we have this old phenomenon of Baptists and bootleggers, which is a reference to any issue in which you have at least a tacit alliance between the people who want some kind of public policy for moral reasons and those who want it because they know they will benefit economically if the policy is implemented. So you have really, it may not be an overt alliance, but a tacit alliance between the drug kingpins and the people that believe drugs ought to be kept out of the hands of just regular people. It's a very bad situation, and it's a very tough dynamic to break.
Yeah, I mean, I heard all of these mantras back in the 70s when I was a young lawyer just starting to practice law. I was down on the border, Texas-Mexican border, and of course, I knew DEA agents, and I saw them in federal court and prosecuting these drug cases, and it's the same mantras that are being repeated today. I mean, nothing's changed. Their whole assumption of this drug war is that they're going to keep people from ingesting these drugs. They're going to keep a drug addict from getting his drugs. Well, if we've learned anything, that simply does not work. People who want these drugs are going to get these drugs. And that's just a fact of life. We've seen it decade after decade after decade. But what they end up doing is they have to pay the exorbitant black market prices that the drug war makes for all these illicit drugs. So to get those black market prices, they've got to go out and engage in the robberies and the muggings and the thefts and so forth. In other words, all the collateral violence. I mean, we don't see winos doing that to get a bottle of wine. And so you've got this huge, market that is created by the drug war. That's the black market. And yet with no diminution in drug usage itself. And then as you point out, there's all the people that are dependent on this. Including the bribes, by the way. We often look at Latin American regimes as being involved in the drug trade with respect to bribes and kickbacks and payoffs and stuff. Well, it's also here on the American side. I mean, they don't smuggle all those drugs across the borders just willy-nilly. They got to be bribing deputy sheriffs and judges and so forth. We only catch a glimpse of it from time to time. But you know darn well that the drug war is corrupting all across the board. In fact, Sheldon, I can't think of one argument left in their arsenal of the drug war status arsenal. What do they have left? In the early days, they had their good intentions where they said, this is what we intend. Well, now we're here 40 years later or something. Their good intentions don't mean anything either. So they've brought violence, they've brought collateral damage, they've brought bribery. They've brought death. I mean, look at Mexico. 70,000 dead people in the last 6 years alone, just from the drug war, not from drugs, from the drug war. I mean, there's really nothing left to justify this war, from what I can see.
No, but this is one of the peculiar dynamics that's unique to politics. Every failure becomes a reason for why they have to redouble their effort and double their budgets. They'll use anything like, the thousands killed in Mexico, or violence spilling across the U.S. border, or the infiltration of drug gangs into the U.S. from Mexico. That never leads to, okay, well, maybe this whole drug thing is misconceived. It leads to, we're not doing enough. We need more money. Give the police and the military more sophisticated weapons. Let's hunt down, and Obama will tell the people in Latin America, well, we have to address the demand side here. In other words, we'll help you with the drug war by cracking down on people that want to use drugs, peaceful people that want to use drugs in the United States. We already have the largest prison population proportionally and in absolute terms of the whole world. That's a disgrace. What do we have, 2.5 million people in prison? A lot of those are non-violent drug offenses. And we shouldn't neglect how the drug war intersects with foreign policy, because it's enabled us meaning the U.S. government, to intervene deeply in foreign countries' affairs, specifically in Latin America, but Asia also, the Middle East. The idea that the U.S. government funds or sometimes directly eradicates crops should offend every American. Just imagine if some foreign country that thought alcohol was sinful was sending planes over here to destroy the grain crops that that go in to make alcohol and liquor. We wouldn't put up with that for a minute. It's how offensive is that? The U.S. government is helping to destroy farmers' crops because that's what they turn to make a living. Because they go and eventually become cocaine or heroin if it's in Asia or the Middle East. We've been involved in violent activity in Colombia and yes, countless countries. It's a disgrace from top to bottom, but it's making a lot of money for people. And when I say a lot of money, I mean above board money. I wasn't counting the illicit trade that government agents themselves may be involved in. And there have been many stories over the years about the CIA and other agencies actually selling drugs, trafficking in drugs. I wasn't talking about that. That's a whole other thing, and there's got to be big bucks there. I was talking about the so-called legitimate money being made through the war on drugs. Someday, I hope the American people will look back on this and say, this is the most insane thing that has ever occurred in public policy, but it can't happen too soon.
Yeah, I think your point about making money. I mean, the regular DEA agents that I knew back in Laredo, they have mortgages. They've got payments to make on their credit cards and so forth. This is just a job. When you've got a mortgage payment and you've got a salary coming in, what incentive do you have to discontinue a program, even though you know that what you're doing in life is a total waste, and even worse, a destructive waste, where you're just ruining people's lives with no benefits at all? And that's what these agents do. They go out and bust people. The federal prosecutors or state prosecutors, they prosecute them. They put them away in jail. As you point out, you got this overcrowded prison industry. They love it, and new customers. And the pattern just repeats itself month after month, year after year. They have record drug busts, and they bring the photographers over in the local news media, and they make a big deal, record drug bust. And it's like, I'm sitting there thinking, how this is supposed to be evidence of progress? I mean, if you're beating the record every year, how's that evidence of progress? But the pattern just keeps repeating itself. Why? Well, as economists point out, that as you constrict the supply, because you're knocking out some of these drug lords, you just attract new suppliers, new people to try to make a quick buck. And that's why we see regular people, airline attendants and stuff, regular people getting into the drug business because there's a chance to score big. And as we've pointed out, Sheldon, there's really one way to put the drug lords out of business, and it's the only way, and that's through legalization. That you legalize drugs, immediately the drug lords, the drug gangs, the drug cartels are out of business overnight. Why? Because they can't compete in a legitimate market. When there's legitimate farmers and dispensaries, marijuana dispensaries or pharmacies selling drugs, this is not a market in which these unsavory elements can compete. Their method is violence and black market monopolies. It can't compete against reputable firms. So our solution accomplishes what their decades of criminal prosecutions and drug busts and so forth have not accomplished.
Well, that's exactly true. The black market will tend to attract unsavory people, because most people, will say, well, it's illegal, I don't want to get involved in that. Even if they didn't think there was anything wrong with the activity per se, the fact that it's been made illegal will tend to, repel people who see themselves as law-abiding. I also wanted to point out that this is an area, anytime you declare something contraband, you really do set the stage for the worst kinds of police abuse. And when we say that the laws against drugs are victimless crimes, or drug activity is a victimless crime, people sometimes misunderstand that. They'll say, no, it's not a victimless crime. A person hurts himself with drugs, or maybe he hurts his family, maybe doesn't pay his bills and not taking care of his kids. That's not what we mean when we say victimless crime. It's certainly true that you can wreck your life and then hurt people around you. That's true with alcohol. That's true with gambling. That's true just with, reading comic books. A person who just decides to shirk his responsibility, there's a spillover effect that's negative about, to the spouse, the kids. That's not what we mean. Well, we mean something more technical by that. Since drugs are bought and sold by willing people, willing parties, right? The buyer and the seller want to be in the transaction. There's no complaining witness. There's nobody who goes to the police and says, this guy sold me drugs and I didn't want to buy them. Or I bought drugs off a guy and I didn't want to do that. They're both willing parties. So how are the cops supposed to get the evidence? They have to have infiltrators, informants, and that opens up the whole door to all kinds of police abuses, right? Entrapment, trickery of various kinds, because otherwise you don't get the information. You never witness the crime. They're not going to do it people are not going to buy and sell drugs out in the open if it's illegal. So how are the cops going to find out? They have to have all this unsavory stuff. And it only comes with the declaration of contraband and a ban on voluntary transactions with respect to that contraband.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you got all the snitches, that a drug addict really doesn't know, or just a drug user doesn't know who's a snitch and who isn't. And so what we've argued that with drug legalization, people are much more likely to seek help with their drug addiction. They'll be more open about it, which is a necessary precondition to overcoming a drug addiction, where you acknowledge you've got a problem, you want to get help, you talk openly with it about it to people, and then you seek help. But in today's society, you don't know who a narc is. Guy may turn you in that you think you could trust. He gets a little reward for it. And so it drives the addiction down underground, under the radar screen, and thereby discouraging people from being open and above board. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up that you had raised earlier was about the militarization of Latin American society. That's a great point, too, because, here in this country we have what's called posse comitatus. And the idea is that the American people say it's a bad idea to have the military serving in a police function. The job of the military is to kill people, wage a war and win the war, and that involves killing people. The police mindset is supposed to be totally different. But the American people say we don't want the military involved in the drug business or other police activity. And yet we send the military into Latin America to do that precise thing. And they end up militarizing Latin American society. You've got the CIA down there killing people. I think you'll recall several years ago where the CIA was involved in the shoot down of that private plane where that pastor and his wife got shot down. I think she died and her child died. This is what we're doing down there. We're militarizing their society. We're corrupting their police forces. We're doing everything that we say shouldn't happen here in the United States. How hypocritical is that?
Yeah, and as long as you bring up the topic of hypocrisy, that's a perfectly that's a fruitful way to discuss this. Also, let's bear in mind that the President of the United States, right, the chief enforcer of the drug war, used marijuana by his own admission, and as he put it, maybe a little blow, that's cocaine, in college. And I urge everybody to go on YouTube and look up Penn Jillette's commentary, about 2 minutes of commentary on this, because he pointed out, and I won't use the language Penn used, but it gave it the proper emphasis, that had Barack Obama gotten caught in college with his marijuana or his cocaine and had gone to jail, he wouldn't be anywhere near the White House these days. His life would have been destroyed. He wouldn't be doing what he's doing. So all these politicians, and Obama's not the only one, but all these politicians who use drugs and got away with it, and who laugh at any time somebody recommends legalization of marijuana, they'll always come back with a joke about, well, we know what you're using recreationally, or it's like it's a big joke. Except, how many lives are being destroyed every day by these people either being thrown into prison or sometimes killed? I mean, there are like 100 SWAT raids a day by militarized police forces bursting into homes, sometimes in the middle of the night, looking for a drug suspect or drugs, often a lot of times going into the wrong house and killing somebody. And yet it's something to laugh about. And this is just disgraceful, and I just wish people understood the hypocrisy and the evil that's behind this drug war. I mean, it's just unbelievable that a president of the United States who gets away with it is responsible for putting away people whose lives will, be totally wrecked as a result of this.
Yeah, I mean, if the rationale behind this war is that somebody should be punished for using drugs, and so if they bust them, they say you've got to go to jail. Well, these guys that acknowledge it, they did this, like Obama. I don't understand why they're not consistent. Say, I need to be punished for this. Let me turn myself in. Sure, you don't need to provide evidence in a court of law convicting me. I'm here morally saying I should be punished for this. Why? Because, as you point out, they're guilty of rank hypocrisy. And there's another aspect of this, Sheldon, that is so disgusting, and that's the racism involved in this. That this provides cops with the perfect excuse to go into these black neighborhoods, Hispanic neighborhoods, and they've got the perfect justification for harassing people, stopping them, searching them, humiliating them. Because it's always, the drug war, I've got to search for drugs and so forth. And then when you see the disparity of the sentencing, you've got a much higher proportion of blacks than whites. I mean, to me, this is a second best to segregation. If you want to, punish the blacks and the Hispanics, what better method than the drug war? And there's that famous case over there in Talia, Texas, where that highly decorated drug war agent goes in and manufactures this entire fake and false case against a large portion of the black community. They end up getting like 50-year sentences, which of course remove them from the community, better than segregation. It moves them into the penitentiary. And of course they can never vote again. That's another aspect of this. And it turned out that it was all fake and false. There wasn't any grounds for it at all. And I mean, you can imagine the judges and so forth with egg on their faces. They had to, rescind these long-term sentences for these people. I mean, this racism has been an inherent part of this drug war from the very beginning.
Yeah, let's not forget the celebrated stop and frisk policy in New York City that I guess began under Giuliani. The great majority of victims of which are Latinos and blacks. That's where the police can just stop you on the street. They don't need to have any particular reason. They can put down anything that sort of gets them past the very low bar, and they can frisk and detain. The fact is, they don't ever, to show you that the policy is just a matter of harassment. They actually don't find a lot of drugs or guns when they do this. But it's just another way of humiliating the citizenry. But most of the burden is going to be on the minority community. They're going to tend not to stop some respectable-looking white, male walking down the street in his tie. There's just no doubt about that. The other thing we need to say, and I alluded to the model of addiction and drug use that most people have, that's something that, like I said, jumps out of the shadows and sort of possesses you like a demon of some kind. I refer to the book by Jacob Sullum, a very good book called Saying Yes, and he points out that any drug you can name, any illegal drug you can name, is today being used responsibly and in moderation by somebody. You never hear about those people because they're illegal drugs. So you only hear about the people who get in trouble with the law, who have wrecked their lives, died or otherwise somehow messed up their lives. But the fact is, and he did this on the basis of research, interviews. It's a well documented book. Any drug you can name, including oh my gosh, heroin, is used responsibly by people, and was before 1917 when the first drug laws were passed, the Harrison Act. People used opium in various forms. They used heroin or morphine in various forms, and they didn't even need a prescription. So we have to get, again, I'm not doing a commercial for drugs, but the point is these are not some sort of demons that jump out at you and grab you and never let you go. And we have to get over that attitude, or else nobody will be able to think clearly about this issue.
Well, Michael Downey Jr. is an example. I mean, for years and years, they just harassed this guy, harangue him because he's a drug addict. And I sympathize with the guy. I feel sorry for him. He's clearly got a drug problem. I don't know if he still has it or not. But here he is this successful actor. And it seems to me that society would be much better off if the state would just get out of this, a separation of drug use in the state, and leave people free to manage these problems on their own, or if they don't feel they have a problem, treat adults as adults, where they decide what they're going to ingest and what they're not going to ingest. If they have a problem, we see that in alcohol. Are there alcoholics? Absolutely. Are there people that drink in moderation? Absolutely. Why shouldn't that be the case all across the board? And so, it raises an interesting question here, Sheldon. There's movements to legalize marijuana, and I see it in this Latin American debate that we opened the show with today, that people are saying, well, I would go along with legalizing marijuana, but not the other drugs, cocaine and heroin and stuff. And I saw a great op-ed from a guy the other day. I forget who he was, somebody famous, that said, you know what? Ditch the whole thing or ditch it not at all. Because all you're doing with legalizing marijuana is you're making it good for the nice little white kids to have their drug of choice, but the black people that are addicted to crack cocaine or cocaine in general, you just keep putting those in jail. And he says, as far as I'm concerned, let the whole edifice fall. And that's my position. I know it's your position too, is that it's got to be legalization across the board based on the moral ground that people have a right to make these decisions on their own under basic principles of freedom. But also, if you leave some of it illegal, you're going to have all this collateral damage, the violence, the drug lords, the drug gangs. The only solution to get rid of all that junk is legalize it across the board.
Right, and I just wanted to throw in here that the racial angle, which you have stressed, and I mentioned earlier, goes back to the very beginning. Every one of these drug laws was racially motivated by at least some of the people pushing them. The opium was identified with the Chinese workers, the railroad workers, the very efficient, energetic railroad workers who spent their leisure time in what were called opium dens. It was a great way for the whites to stigmatize the Chinese. And so they made a move against opium. Marijuana was associated with Mexicans, heroin with jazz, blacks. They used to say that bullets couldn't penetrate the skin of someone who used heroin. It was all part of mythology designed to stigmatize the other, a group that was not like you, and that tended to be minority, racial, and national groups. The whole thing is tainted with racism and bigotry from the very start. So this is nothing new. It's just carrying it through.
Yeah, it's not surprising. I mean, and then there's that famous movie Reefer Madness where they make it look like it's this horrible drug, and then kids find out that it's all a lie, and then they lose trust and faith in whatever pronouncements are made. And that's another reason why we got to get this thing out of the hands of the state. Leave these problems, drug usage, drug abuse, in the hands of the private sector. You know, the Alcoholics Anonymous is the most successful drug rehab program in history. There's no government involvement. It's an entirely private sector thing. And it goes back to your point. It's simply because you legalize drugs, there's this conception that, oh my gosh, everybody's going to go on drugs. Oh, I won't be able to resist, you know. Well, it's just pure nonsense. If somebody is addicted to drugs, he's going to get his drugs. If somebody isn't, whether it's legal or not, is not going to affect their decision making. But it brings it all into the open, like alcohol addiction or cigarette addiction or whatever. It brings it out in the open. People can manage their own problems, but you get rid of all the collateral, the robberies, the muggings, the drug lords, the drug gangs, the 70,000 dead people in Mexico, the ruination of lives, the overcrowded prisons. I mean, I just can't think of a better solution to a problem that afflicts our society, just legalization across the board.
Yeah, it's one of those old stories that very few individuals think that if drugs were legalized tomorrow, that person would, he himself would go out and wreck his lives on drugs. It's always somebody else will do it. I'm not saying I would become a drug user if you legalize it, but that guy over there will. And so everybody thinks that. But that guy over there says the same thing about this guy. So it's just one of those things that people are not willing to think through. They just have bought all the propaganda, and the propaganda story is a whole other story. The government propaganda mill on drugs is just unbelievable. You alluded to it with reefer madness, but it's been done many, many times. This idea is to make us think that these things are, first of all, so irresistibly good that we can't possibly trust people with these things. Well, what does that tell kids? That tells kids, I got to try some of this stuff. It's so good they won't even let me get anywhere near it. I couldn't think of a better way to have a commercial for drug use. It makes it sound like it's wonderful. The whole thing seems ridiculous until you remember that people are benefiting from it. People are profiting off it. Otherwise, it looks crazy. You say, why would they be doing such insane things? Because it makes money. It makes money, and that's what we have to break through and show the cynicism behind the whole thing.
Well, the good news is that more and more people are figuring it out. They're breaking through. We see this in Latin America. We see it here in the United States. My hunch is that we very well may see this enormous apparatus be disintegrated, dismantled the way that prohibition was. And what a nice victory that will be for the principles of a free and peaceful society. Anyway, that's the show. Sheldon, enjoyed it again. As always, if you're tuning in, come and visit our website at fff.org. We've got a great webinar on June 19th with Sheldon on the income tax, which he was the author of one of our great books on this subject, Your Money, Your Life, Why We Must Abolish the Income Tax. You can register online at our website, fff.org, or subscribe to our daily publication, FFF Daily. That's the show. Enjoyed it. Thank you, Sheldon, and we'll see you all next week.